Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar is called Cracking the Code to Effective Talent Management. I'm Vicki Alcott. I'm a consultant and a director of project management here at Org Vitality. And I'm so very pleased to welcome our executive consultant, our speaker today, Jerry Seibart. Jerry has a really rich history in designing employee surveys that measure areas aligned with talent optimization. He's also the author of Hidden Drivers of Success, Leveraging Employee Insights for Strategic Advantage. Before I turn it over to Jerry, just a few quick housekeeping notes to mention. First, there will be time for questions, so please feel free to use the Q&A box if you have any questions. Next, everyone who is attending will receive a case study that Jerry authored, and we will send that out along with today's recording and slides. Finally, we are a survey company, so of course there is a short survey at the end, and we do hope that you'll take a minute just to share any feedback you have. With all that housekeeping out of the way, I'll now hand the webinar over to Jerry.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. I appreciate the introduction. Well, why don't we start by defining what we mean by talent optimization? Some people might think of it as, well, isn't that kind of the same as employee engagement? Although I think engagement is a factor. You know, there's other things, work-life integration, balance, even overall fulfillment that might be part of it. You know, could it have to do with talent acquisition, figuring out how to find and hire the people that we need? That certainly is a struggle for many organizations these days. Maybe identifying the critical roles in the organization and making sure we have them filled with our best people, or making sure we're all rowing in the same direction with crystal clarity around goals and standards. Stress, burnout, mental wellness, those have been big issues the last couple of years, well, bigger than normal. So you could say that helping our contributors increase their resilience would be a definition of talent optimization. Or, I mean, in the spring of 2020, or even way back in the Great Recession, a lot of people might have argued talent optimization was part of crisis management, right? Cutting staff or taking other steps in response to an economic shock to the system. But I would argue that it is definitely not the case there. And we have a little data to show it. So in the end, there are many ways we could define talent optimization. So I'm going to focus in on one way that we've defined it that has been highly effective for a number of organizations. You know, we have found in a lot of simple engagement surveys that there were often similar units in the same company with similar levels of engagement, but very different performance on other metrics like turnover, productivity, or customer satisfaction. So engagement was not telling us the whole story. Through our research, both with clients and in some large multi-company studies, we found that in many cases, alignment and capabilities tended to do the best job of complementing engagement, connecting with talent metrics to business outcomes. Now, alignment is the degree to which everyone in the organization is rowing synchronously in the same direction, right? Strong vertical alignment would be indicated by behaviors that are aligned with the brand, goals, customers, coupled with units that are working effectively together, or horizontal alignment across functions and departments. Capabilities is defined as the extent to which competencies, information, and resources are sufficient to meet internal or external customer expectations and execute on the strategy. And engagement in this framework includes, you know, satisfaction, commitment, like intent to stay, and discretionary effort, as well as advocacy, willingness to recommend the organization. So alignment, capabilities, engagement, or what we often call ACE for short. And we have found many different profiles across departments, including a number where engagement was high. But one thing we know is that high engagement does not guarantee high alignment or capabilities. A highly engaged team that was clear on customer service goals might still be under-equipped or low on capabilities, and therefore underperform on customer satisfaction metrics. Or a highly engaged team could be happily working on the wrong priorities if the goals were not communicated effectively, a case of strategic disconnect. The best performing units are those that are strong on all three factors, and thus our definition of optimized talent: an aligned, highly capable, and fully engaged team for the top row in this table. And by the way, the bottom row labeled high risk is not labeled lightly, as we'll see a little later in the webinar. First, though, I wanted to circle back to that comment I made about what a lot of companies might have thought were optimization strategies just a couple of years ago when the pandemic was really taking hold and the economy was shifting so suddenly. And maybe think about, how did your company respond when the pandemic led to the bottom falling out of the economy? So some research that we've done I think will give us some insights about what the impact of some of those optimization strategies has likely been. Common wisdom says that the steps companies typically take to manage an economic downturn have more or less an across-the-board negative impact on alignment capabilities and particularly engagement. But we have found that there is a difference between various tactics companies use and the impact of those actions. A lot of those actions have to do with reducing resources, the first cluster in this table. Tactics such as layoffs, budget cuts, and hiring freezes uniformly did have a negative effect on ACE levels. These actions, which include what I would say are some of the most severe responses, can certainly leave employees feeling like they need to carry a heavier load with maybe no additional recognition, with fewer resources, capabilities decline, and certainly the perceived inequality of these tactics can weaken engagement. Cutting back can also lead to a value disconnect between employees and their company, thereby undermining alignment. Employees find it difficult to be in sync with the strategic direction of the company when they see those around them losing their jobs. Another area of focus was often around compensation. In an interesting contrast, the effects of compensation-oriented tactics were actually very different. Pay cuts, pay freezes, benefits reductions had a negative impact on employee engagement, which is not a surprise. But compensation cuts did not have a significant impact on alignment or capabilities. It's possible that these actions, while not welcomed, are more likely to be viewed as rational and acceptable, sharing the pain through lower profits for the company and lower rewards for the staff. Thus, alignment maybe is maintained, and with resources preserved in the organization, capabilities remain largely intact. We examined one other tactic for reducing labor costs: mandatory furloughs, which are typically used to cut pay by reducing total work hours. Like the other techniques, use of furloughs had no impact on alignment and capabilities, but also had no impact on engagement over time. Perhaps that's because, unlike the other actions, maybe a furlough can be viewed as somewhat more equitable. You don't get paid, but you're also not required to work during the furlough. Whether it was on the retail floor, behind the counter, or in a call center, customer service took a big hit in the pandemic, as it did in the Great Recession. And the greatest negative impact did not come from eliminating resources or reducing compensation. Surprisingly, the most powerful negative effects we saw in ACE came from when companies chose to reduce service levels to customers, and when they made changes that reduced services internally between departments. Reducing services to customers had a strong negative impact on alignment and engagement. It would seem employees see a disconnect between the often repeated strategies and mission statements that emphasize customer service and actions that may damage customer relationships, if not harm customers themselves. It's no shock that aspects of engagement, such as advocacy and discretionary effort, might also decline in that situation. A lesser effect was observed for capabilities, which may mean that employees realize the capabilities for good service remain in place, they're just being underused. When companies reduced services between departments, there was a strong impact on all three of these ACE factors. Logically, changes that imperil a department's ability to service other internal groups would lead to a lower perception of capabilities. I mean, after all, points of failure within the organization can reasonably be expected to ultimately lead to failures with customers. Employees may feel less certain that they're on the same strategic page as senior leadership, thus lessening alignment. The strong impact on engagement is a little more puzzling. I mean, it could be a reaction to being placed in a situation where you're prevented from doing the best work possible, resulting in a certain degree of cognitive dissonance, if you will, or perhaps it flows from frustration with a lack of support from other parts of the organization. Each of the tactics that I've mentioned so far, it could be considered reductive, if not actually destructive in their fundamental nature. Leaders may choose to think of them as pruning now for future growth, but that doesn't change the fact that pruning has serious repercussions for employees and the customers they serve. One tactic had a positive impact on ACE, identifying process changes to reduce costs. Companies that used this approach reported a strong positive impact on alignment and engagement and a moderate positive impact on capabilities. I mean, this approach probably maintained consistency with pre-crisis goals, therefore looking within an organization to collaboratively make improvements and reduce costs actually increases alignment. And for employees, it represents the company choosing maybe surgery over amputation, right? Not surprisingly, this path can actually lead to higher levels of engagement. Employees, are highly attuned to organizational behavior that values people and recognizes their ability to help a company prevail in challenging times. So it's definitely a lesson here for every organization, facing a difficult future or struggling with current events. So when I say that ACE translates directly into organizational outcomes, I don't mean just at the department level. In large multi-company studies we've done, we have found and published differences like these. Where companies that are high on ACE much more likely to be financial performance leaders in their industry or quality leaders. They tend to average about half the employee turnover as companies that are low on alignment capabilities and engagement, and deliver much higher levels of internal and external customer service. I mean, the bottom line is organizations with people who are aligned, have the needed capabilities, and are engaged are more effective at reaching their strategic goals and at helping employees achieve their personal goals. To make that case, I wanted to share a case study based on the quick serve chain Jack in the Box. Here, after applying the ACE framework and taking a number of very targeted follow-up actions, we learned quite a bit about how the model works. In fact, it turned out to be such a powerful corporate application of evidence-based thinking and practice that Jack in the Box was awarded the Human Resource Management Impact Award, which is an award presented by the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology, as well as the Society of Human Resource Management. Jack in the Box was recognized, because they had taken this very model-driven and longitudinal approach that resulted in increases in sales, profits, guest satisfaction, productivity. Now, I should say that there was a whole journey with the leadership team that I'll briefly describe, but then we'll focus on some of the quantitative results themselves, the impacts. So a bit of context. They are a fairly large organization, but the key point here is that there were consistent talent management systems across locations. So things like talent acquisition, training protocols, performance management, these were all very standardized policies and procedures. Although being in a mature and pretty much commoditized service industry, they do face very tough competition. Margins are pretty tight, and being a service business, they're obviously highly dependent on labor. And it's an area where inconsistency can really kill the customer experience. And in the case of a highly branded business like Jack in the Box, it can injure the brand. To quote the CEO, smiling, helpful employees in one location and disengaged ones in another are just not good for consistent branding. At the start of the project, frontline turnover at the company was close to 150% annually, which is pretty typical for the industry. But we were able to make some pretty impressive changes to that. But having that high level of turnover has implications. The shorter the employee tenure, the harder it is for a restaurant manager to consistently achieve high productivity and quality numbers, and to have sufficient employees cross-trained on different workstations, and thus really delight guests on a regular basis. In short, it is an industry where people matter big time. At the beginning of this effort, human resources socialized and leaders bought into the service profit chain, where better customer service links to customer loyalty and to advocacy, and thus to higher profitability. But they realized that the chain does not actually begin with customer service. Customer service does not just happen. Great customer service happens when key systems are in place to support it. When HR began to frame key hypotheses connected to the service profit chain model, the company started to get its first look at statistical relationships between internal service, as measured by things like employee surveys, customer satisfaction, and profits. And that in turn really engaged the leadership team members in thinking about what was strategic versus tactical and how measures connect to one another. It started a process of sorting out the relative importance of various people factors like leadership and leader behaviors, training, employee engagement, with outcomes like turnover, customer satisfaction, financial performance. It was a way to think about how investments in people influenced actual restaurant results. And it underscored the need for good measures, including a framework for understanding and measuring human capital. Because with good measures, it would then be possible to learn how people influence productivity, customers, and financial performance. And ACE became that framework for human capital. The initial assessment of ACE found that roughly 1/3 of all the restaurants were already at the optimized talent profile, which would have been more exciting, except that pretty much an equal number also had the high risk profile. So a lot of locations with both the best possible outcome and the worst possible outcome, and the remainder spread across other profiles. Certainly the high-risk units could learn a lot from the optimized units, but before anyone would invest the effort, we had to answer the so what question. What did it really matter, on the ground, facing the guests in the restaurants? When we started doing some analytics, we were amazed to find that ACE could explain half of the variance in turnover or retention across locations, which is a tremendous result. And interestingly, it was capabilities more than engagement that was the most important predictor. Most of the time, we find that out of the three factors, engagement is the strongest predictor of people outcomes. And in fact, engagement was the strongest predictor of productivity at the restaurant level. We could explain about 1/4 of the variance in productivity, which was defined as labor costs as a percent of sales, right? So a smaller ratio means greater productivity with this definition. So you look for a negative relationship. As ACE scores go up, the ratio goes down and productivity improves. But what did this mean in practical terms, right? This kind of model development isn't something that's going to really resonate with restaurant managers or even senior leaders. It translated to some very positive business impacts as ACE scores improved. There were reductions of 21% on average in turnover and gains of 2.3% in productivity, both of which were highly significant. In fact, between them, these changes translated into thousands of dollars of savings for individual restaurants, which if you multiply across a couple of thousand restaurants can really add up. And for a restaurant manager, lower turnover has all sorts of benefits. Less time reviewing applications, interviewing, and training new hires means more time to focus on operations, right? It was a virtuous cycle if ever there was one. We also found that ACE could account for almost a third of the differences in customer satisfaction scores across the restaurants. Here again, capabilities was the strongest predictor, but that was not a surprise here, as capabilities is typically the measure having the strongest relationship to customer metrics. And once again, moving the needle on ACE had significant measurable impacts on business metrics. Top box satisfaction scores increased by 5 points, complaints dropped by 32%, and when there were complaints, resolutions improved by over 50%. And other research that the company did had shown that complaint resolution was very important to customer loyalty. So what sorts of things were they doing to improve ACE and see some impacts like this? There were a lot of actions at the company, region, and restaurant level. Here's one example. And it grew out of a key driver analysis that we did for capabilities to see, well, what's most influencing that capability score, since we knew it was affecting guest satisfaction as well as turnover. And it turned out that the top driver of capabilities was access to training. What did that mean? Because really, training protocols are supposed to be the same at every location. Well, we learned that some managers, to save a few labor hours, which was a slight benefit to their productivity metrics, were skipping hands-on training and relying on computer-based training for employees learning new workstations, even though the protocol required hands-on training as well. So the survey showed how this shortcut was having unintended consequences in ways the restaurant managers never realized. Employees without full training made errors, lowering guest satisfaction, and were stressed as they struggled to keep up with the rest of the crew. Coworkers were frustrated, guest satisfaction was down, while turnover was up when frustrated, undertrained crew quit. But now, instead of debating what might be happening, we had the data to show managers exactly how their choices were connected to the outcomes. And once managers understood the real net effect of their, quote, cost saving, it was easy to get them to comply with proper procedures. There was a pretty wide range of actions that were rolled out. I mean, one of the things that we learned from the survey was that restaurant managers needed more time with their district managers, whose role originally allowed them tremendous flexibility in how they spent their time. At first, the district managers didn't like the change that required more face time with the restaurant managers, but when their districts started showing gains in KPIs, that changed pretty quickly. A number of changes were made to programs in Jax University, as their training center was called, a program that taught restaurant managers how to effectively manage a second or third location was particularly impactful. To run more than one site requires some real upskilling in both business and leadership skills. Right? The managers need to learn better delegation, for example, because they split their time between restaurants. The managers who went through the program, regardless of whether they were actually ever given a second location, achieved more positive results as measured in the survey and better outcomes in most restaurant metrics. Jack in the Box also aligned their leadership model, which they called Head, Heart, Hands with ACE, which actually the two fit together pretty nicely. But by combining these, by linking them, that gave some clarity to leaders and employees about what was expected. And second, gave them permission to speak up about people, policies, or actions that didn't seem to line up with those expectations. It brought a new transparency and effectiveness to the culture. But ultimately, the financial impact, I would say, was the most impressive. By addressing those high-risk units, which remember was about a third of all of them, there was the potential for up to $50 million in additional revenue, because the optimized units tended to have sales that ran about 18% higher than the high-risk units. And because optimized units ran higher profit margins as well, 37% higher than the high-risk units, almost half of that was able to go straight to the bottom line. So when used effectively, I think the model, or this way of conceptualizing optimized talent, can be very powerful and very impactful. So how do you get there? I mean, that was a particular case. That was a quick serve restaurant chain, right? Kind of a unique type of business. I think really there's a number of steps to getting there. And as Jack in the Box showed, leader engagement in a well-designed effort that includes surveys, interventions, and effective analytics can be a powerful pathway. But there is more to it. And sometimes you have to start with understanding who you are and who you are not. You need clarity around your strategy and value proposition as an employer. So, I mean, every company needs its own unique strategy to be effective. And even in the same business, you need your own approach to deliver a unique value proposition. Right? Different strategies can be effective in the same industry. It's central to differentiating your company. So each of these companies runs a large retail operation, right? One focuses on financials and is a cost leader. One competes on, and competes on price. One focuses on, I would say, R&D and cutting edge products and competes on innovation. And one makes it all about the customer, aiming to provide the best possible experience. And interestingly, right, when you capture the different strategies in just a couple of words, it's pretty powerful when you can say, okay, their strategy and approach, it can really be summarized so simply and so clearly. Could you explain your own company strategy in 2 or 3 words? If so, that would be great. But if we think about this, not for those companies specifically, but just these 3 different strategies, they're also going to need different skills from their people, right? Different things from their talent. And there's going to be different ways of engaging those different workforces. The needed values will influence things like performance management system design. Competency models will emphasize different skills. Job design is going to vary, in part because engagement drivers will be different, right? Approaches to talent acquisition will be heavily influenced by all of those. Think about designing an employee survey for each of these organizations, right? There's a lot of overlap in employee survey topics, but how you ask about something can vary quite a bit, right? So a question like, I have the authority to solve customer problems, could be an important item in a survey for a company with a customer experience strategy, probably not as critical at a cost leader. One organization may need more items addressing manager openness to new ideas or the level of comfort staff have when making suggestions, right? That's going to be important for an innovation leader. Another will give more attention to questions on process efficiency, managers removing roadblocks, or perhaps knowledge transfer. Now, any of those questions would be useful to any of the companies, but when you have to choose, what to include and what to exclude so that your survey is a manageable length, connections to your strategy make for very good decision criteria. You also need to have alignment vertically, right? You can't mix strategies. A lot of smaller or mid-sized companies have cloudy strategies, trying to be innovative and a cost leader, for example. But clarity and consistency of strategy is what enables the unique value proposition and differentiates you in the marketplace. How do you get that Clarity, well, here's an example from a financial services company, a large global financial services company, who wanted to really clarify their employer brand and leverage it effectively. And the most important decision for development of their employer brand was to use a sort of from the ground up approach. They wanted to ensure authenticity, to make sure that the brand was in fact real. And so they started by surveying all employees to understand what they valued in the work environment, right? They gave them like a list of 40 different organizational aspects and had each one rated. And they followed that up with a fairly large number of focus groups with a cross-section of employees. In fact, almost 10% of all employees were invited to participate in one of these around the world. So it was a lot of qualitative input as well. And from those inputs, they developed what they felt was a truly authentic brand, avoiding aspirational value propositions, which is something that I highly recommend as well, right? So they wanted a brand that described who they were, not who they wished they were. Because your employer brand, your value proposition as an employer, it's not something that can just be decided at the top and then it just exists, right? It's going to be influenced by the actual culture. And if you set an aspirational brand, then you're going to have to spend a lot of effort trying to achieve it. And in the meantime, people coming into the organization might find a real disconnect between what they're told the company offers and how it treats employees and the reality. And that can lead to churn, really, where people get very disappointed in their first few months and quickly move on. Now, in this example, what they learned was that their employer brand was really defined by 9 attributes drawn from the survey and the comments of the employees. The focus groups had generated a huge amount of data, but it enabled them to identify these attributes and characterize the firm's role in financial markets, with their people, and in their culture. And from that, they were able to create a brand statement, right? So when they said, well, our role, we're very central to capital markets. We provide a lot of insight. We have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise in the company. Our people, internally, people are accessible to each other. They work well together. It's a collaborative culture. And there's a lot of different perspectives, and they're all valued. And our culture is one that supports curiosity, very collegial, and very analytically. Right? As soon as they started sharing these initial findings with managers, it was interesting. They found that managers were right away, even before the project was fully complete and rolled out, starting to use this language when they were interviewing job candidates, right? Why would you want to work here? They started using this terminology and saying, well, this is what we're like. And unlike an aspirational brand, they knew this really would be a new hire's experience. Those attributes were distilled into a simple statement. It boiled down to only 6 words. The first part of the statement, "Our views matter," spoke to the firm's role in the financial markets. Employees, they said they believe that the firm plays a very important role in credit markets, and that financial market participants viewed the firm's opinions and research and analytics very favorably, that they were recognized as a thought leader. The second part of the statement, "So will yours," indicates that everyone has a voice. Employees said that one of the special things about the culture was that regardless of your title, you have the opportunity to express your viewpoint, to influence the way other people think and the decisions that get made. And this brand was very helpful for them when competing for talent with giant investment banks and hedge funds, right? Because that's who they're competing. They're competing with Wall Street organizations, and those organizations are able to pay much higher salaries. But the difference in the culture and in their value proposition as an organization was very helpful. So the first step is making sure you have that clarity of strategy and your value proposition. Analytics, I think, are also very important. We saw some examples from Jack in the Box for that. This is an example of a way that I'll often lay out results. If one of the companies I'm working with is using the ACE framework, I'll actually overlay it onto their organizational chart, which has some real advantages because leaders are familiar with it as a display. And patterns within the organizational structure can become clear almost instantly. Both high performing units and groups that are struggling are immediately identifiable. Consistent themes, such as in this example, misalignment in the sales division, right? Low alignment scores across the board are immediately identifiable. And strong capabilities in the corporate services group there in the center, are also easily observed. Decisions regarding leader development can be coordinated with this information, right? Who needs coaching or training in how to better engage employees? Where is information about the direction and strategy not getting through? Maybe communication skills need enhancement. Succession and career development can be aided, right? A double or a triple red score in a chart like this could reflect a manager who's in a new stretch assignment, but you'd expect a strong leader to adapt and be able to create a high performance team over time. And being able to instantly see the variability, can let you know whether some broad one-size-fits-all programs make sense or should be avoided. Now, in this example, this pattern of results, although I changed all the names here, was real. I mean, this was from an actual organization. And I remember when I was pointing out the pattern that here I've labeled with the supply chain group, where there were very low scores on alignment and capabilities, but very high scores on engagement, as an interesting case of the misguided enthusiasm profile. The executive overseeing that group within operations support immediately spoke up and said that she knew that group well. They'd had the same manager for a long time, almost no turnover in the group. People liked working with each other. They loved their manager. But that the manager of the group had a tendency to, quote, protect them from changes and edicts coming down from corporate. So there were some new tools and things that were not being deployed in the group that were being deployed elsewhere. And it was interesting, when the employees took the survey, they were very clear, hey, we like what we're doing. We like our team, our coworkers, our boss, but they could see that there was a lack of alignment between the direction their unit was moving and the rest of the company, and thus a very low alignment score. And frankly, there were other issues coming up as they worked with their departments and customers. So capability score went down as well. So people could see it happening. And even though it had not yet impacted their engagement, what it did for the organization was it let that senior executive know that they really did have to work with that leader, even though they've been in the organization a long time. They needed to understand the implications of some of what they were doing with their unit and how it was starting to affect the organization overall. There's also thought that needs to go into choosing the right metrics, right? Are we measuring what is important? Or to refine that question, are we measuring what is important for different audiences? Because there are many different measures that are important, and it's essential, might be essential for us. So let's think of, human resources, for example. There's things we need to monitor for, our own operations. But those same measures won't necessarily convey strategic value to the C-suite. As one example, take talent acquisition, right? The number of requisitions filled is an important operational metric, but it is an indicator of activity or perhaps efficiency at best. Better would be an indicator of effectiveness, right? Whether recruited talent is staying. That can tell us if we're selecting good matches, people who are aligned with our values, for example. But even better would be a quality of higher metric that conveys impact, telling us how well the talent we're bringing in is meeting customer needs. Now we're getting into a domain that is much more likely to resonate with senior leaders than knowing that 85% of requisitions are filled in 30 days. Another challenge is that far too often important decisions about talent are addressed with limited evidence or even faulty logic. So do you have a logical numbers-based approach to understanding the payoffs from things like improved employee health or improvements in talent acquisition processes or onboarding processes, employee development efforts? In a lot of organizations, leaders approach people metrics with far less rigor and analysis than questions about other resources, such as finances, customer behavior and loyalty, or technology. Yet, human capital measures have immense potential to improve the decisions of leaders. So there's simply no shortcuts for rigor, and particularly if you want to enable more advanced analytics. To be able to link your people metrics to other business outcomes, you need to both make good choices and have careful design. So what about ACE itself, right? In ensuring alignment. When alignment is low, you can expect a range of symptoms, including possibly confusing brand promise or having lots of urgent but perhaps not so important activities. You might have non-competitive costs because of a lot of misdirected energy, even maybe some burnout or talent loss from people working hard but not necessarily smart. And sometimes you see poor decision-making or delayed decisions as the buck is passed upward due to unclear or conflicting goals. The solutions will be specific to your particular situation, but common opportunities include, the things we see listed here. One organization I worked with that made impressive improvements in alignment in just a single year did it by ostensibly updating their performance management system. They decided that among each employee's goals, at least one had to be explicitly tied to a department goal, including an explanation of how goal achievement would advance the department goal. And one goal similarly had to directly connect to a company's strategic goal with an explanation of how it would impact it. But that meant everyone had to be very clear on the goals at every level of the company. So senior leaders found themselves committing much more time and effort to explaining those goals and why they were important. And because they were out there meeting with staff, there was a lot more two-way communication as well, lots of opportunity to clarify nuances for employees. The net was a tremendous improvement in alignment scores. I think it was about 17 points in 1 year, as not just the strategy and direction, but how each employee's role connected to and influenced strategic results had never been so well understood. Something else to think about, if you're in an HR group, is how aligned is HR itself? It can be worth asking. Can you draw a line from your company value proposition to your HR strategy? How has it influenced your strategy? Sometimes it's helpful to start with a little self-reflection and consider, how aligned we are as a group, right? So, start. This could be something you do as a team. Consider the organization strategy. What are the most important goals for the organization to achieve? Your team should be able to verbalize these goals pretty accurately. Next would be to describe the workforce strategy. What people results are critical for us if we're going to achieve the goals, identified as strategic. Are they going to be around retention, growth, innovation? And then last, think about an HR strategy in the context of the company and the workforce strategy. What people drivers, what initiatives and investments impact performance on those people results? And then compare that list with a list of the initiatives currently in place or planned and look for mismatches. And then there's growing capabilities. So if capabilities is your challenge, you might see indicators such as an inability to meet customer requirements or high levels of rework or warranty claims because of product issues, maybe overstaffing as a quote unquote fix to help meet standards or customer requirements. You might be seeing low customer relationship scores, low customer retention, maybe some stress and turnover because people aren't able to achieve what customers want, like we saw at Jack in the Box. Capabilities may be the most straightforward to build out, though not necessarily the easiest. Ensuring people have the resources and tools, the technology to deliver for customers is clearly essential. Maintaining a high level of teamwork and collaboration has become maybe a more unique challenge as remote work has become so common for many of us. Developing the skills for today and the future is a continuous effort, and one also made more difficult when less experienced staff no longer have the opportunity, or maybe less opportunity, to watch over the shoulder of more experienced peers because they're not working in the same place anymore. But these issues come up in all kinds of ways. I got an insurance quote a few weeks ago, and when I called the company back with some questions about it, and I tried to talk to the rep about it, he couldn't bring up the quote. I gave him the number of the quote, looked it up, couldn't find it in the system, and eventually realized that because it was from a different unit of the company, he wasn't able to access it, even though the number I was given to call with questions was the one that led to that call center. In the end, I had to literally email the quote to the rep so that they could see it and answer my questions. But that kind of access to information, or you can think of it as the technology itself, can really undercut people's ability to perform and deliver for customers. And then nurturing engagement. When engagement is low, you might see low customer satisfaction, low productivity, low levels of energy, maybe even top talent leaving when market conditions permit, like now, or worse, deadwood staying in place when you don't want them to. Lower referrals of new talent from the existing workforce, even kind of a cynical or apathetical culture. But there's probably been more research on boosting engagement than any other aspect of organizational culture, right? And some things come up again and again as drivers of engagement, including recognizing people, providing growth and learning opportunities, transparent communication, treating people with respect, developing or earning trust. When those things are done well, employees become much more eager advocates for the organization. Discretionary effort goes up, and people's intention to stay with the company tends to be maximized. And the last step I wanted to describe is enhancing the deliverables that HR brings to the table. Remember in the Jack in the Box example, it all started with the service profit chain, viewing people investments, initiatives, and metrics in that context. That action was essentially a major enhancement to what HR was bringing to the executive table. Give you an example, in our database, 3 out of 4 employees in our employee survey database say they were onboarded effectively, and a similar number say, they have a reasonable work-life balance. So how do you know when you have a problem? Well, this was data from a large business services company. And just among their top 100 leaders, about 30% did not feel there was anyone in the company who could act as a coach or a mentor for them. 40% felt that the onboarding experience they had did not do anything to actually help prepare them for their role. And a majority, 53%, felt that there were some serious issues with work and home life balance. And on all 3 of these measures, the top leaders actually fared worse than the average employee. How important is that? Well, what we've seen is that those sorts of factors for talent optimization can be very important. In one large study that we did, we looked at almost 20 core deliverables for human resources, from talent acquisition to designing and developing teams, to rolling out self-serve technology, all of which can be tools for optimizing talent. We used some advanced modeling to see how much impact each of those HR deliverables had on people's perceptions of the overall value delivered by HR, as well as on HR's effectiveness at risk mitigation. And of the factors we've been talking about, the role of coach and confidant, right, being there for those leaders, whether it was filled by HR or arranged by HR, was a top 5 value driver, meaning success or failure there had a disproportionate impact on how senior leaders judged the overall value delivered by HR. And when it comes to helping the company manage risk, coaching, leader development, succession planning were all among the most important factors. More important even than talent retention, which was a little bit of a surprise, but maybe not that much of a surprise when you think about the costs and risks of failed leaders. So things that HR does to optimize talent, have more impact and wider impact than you might have thought. And the other thing we saw in that study was that there was a lot of room for opportunity out there. The study included almost 2,000 organizations, and on some of those key talent optimization techniques, less than half of leaders and managers felt that it was being done, really well within their companies. So to quickly wrap it up and leave a little time for questions. A highly engaged team is not automatically optimized. There must also be alignment with strategic goals and across teams, and the capabilities to meet customer expectations and execute on the strategy. If you haven't already, then make sure there is true clarity of purpose and a clear value proposition across the enterprise. Sometimes I have followed up surveys where 85% of employees say they understand the strategy, right? If you ask them, agree or disagree, do you understand the strategy? But then follow that up by asking them to pick the top 3 or 4 strategic goals from a list of 7 or 8. Well, that's a great way to see if people only think they know the strategy, or if perhaps mixed messages are going out. Think hard about the metrics you were using. What are they really conveying? Are they telling what is important, or only what is, are they focused more on what's easy to measure? The drivers of alignment, capabilities, and engagement are going to be somewhat different in every organization. Your organization is unique, your strategy is unique, or should be, and so the most important drivers of ACE will be as well. And the role of human resources is even more essential than you probably would have expected. Much of what HR is accountable for are things that, when done well, can truly help to optimize your talent. So with that, I will stop and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Jerry. That was a really interesting presentation. You gave us a lot of great food for thought. We do have a couple questions that have come in. First one, would you say that alignment, capabilities, and engagement are measured through a specific set of questions? Do you use the same ones at all companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you've heard me say that each company is unique and their strategy is unique. There is a core set of questions that we use as a starting point for measuring alignment, capabilities, and engagement, but they are typically tailored for each organization that wants to apply this model. So there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of consistency in how those are measured across organizations, but it's not like a standardized measurement tool. And the other aspect of that is, alignment, capabilities, engagement are somewhat high-level concepts. There are a lot of things that can influence those. And so when we're doing a survey designed to measure them, we'll also include items to measure the drivers of alignment, capabilities, and engagement. And those are really going to be truly unique to each organization. And it might be a completely different mix of driver questions in one organization from another, right? So the ones for Jack in the Box, there were a lot of questions that were very specific to their restaurant processes and the way things work in a quick serve business. Whereas in another organization, they're just going to be a different set of questions.
Okay, great. Thanks. We have another question, but before I get to that next question, there was a request if you could please show the recap slide again, if you could put that one back up.
Yep, put that back up, and we will be distributing a copy of the deck as well.
Great, thank you. And here is another question for you. What was that award you mentioned that Jack in the Box won? Can anyone apply for it? How would you apply? Can you give us a little bit more information on that?
Sure. That's called the Human Resource Management Impact Award. And it is an award given by SIOP, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, and SHRM. And yes, anyone can apply to it. If you go to the SIOP website, which is easy to find, siop.org, siop.org, and do a search for Impact Award or HRM Impact Award, it'll take you to that page. And I think in a month or so, it'll open for new applications. And there's a form you fill out, and the key to that award is being able to say, hey, here's a challenge we were facing as an organization. Here's the approach we used, and how that approach has some scientific basis to it. And here are some measures of how it impacted the organization, and those can be people metrics. In fact, a lot of the times they are people metrics. Around turnover and productivity and so forth. But a lot of the winners are able to show other kinds of metrics as well, impacts on, costs, for example. And that website includes, descriptions of past winners. Some of them even load little videos explaining what they did. So it's a great resource, and I would encourage anyone to, take a look at that. And if they've got a project they think really was impactful for the organization, to go ahead and apply.
All right, great. Thanks, Jerry. Well, I think we're pretty much at time. So I want to thank you, Jerry, for all of that great insight you've provided. And we'd like to thank everybody for coming. Again, as a reminder, we will send you out a copy of the slides. Feel free to reach out to Jerry if you have any additional questions, and hope everyone has a fabulous day today. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Vicki, and thanks everyone for coming. Bye-bye.